Okay, we're going to talk about mixing, and this is very basic mixing. It will take you the rest of your life to fully become a master at mixing. So this is a great starting point. The most important part of mixing by far is arranging the parts well. And we've been talking about that in this class. We're not trying to put parts together that don't fit well and then trying to fix it in the mix. We're thinking intelligently ahead of time so that our bass, accompaniment, and lead and rhythm parts are not masking each other. And really a lot of what mixing is trying to fix little masking problems that have happened as we've composed our track. So let's assume we've picked good parts and that we're in the ballpark. The main thing that you want to focus on in mixing then is level. So that's all we're going to focus on this first song is how do we set some basic levels? Okay, I'm going to just go through these steps right here. You can follow along. These are my tips for basic mixing. And come over to the track here. I'm going to pull up the mixer window. What I'm going to do is cycle through the loudest part of my song, which should be the chorus. And I'm going to mute all of my tracks. And I'm going to unmute just the main rhythm track, which is this guy right here, okay? So I'm going to start by adjusting this fader until I see 0 here, which is the highest level of this VU meter right here. You want to set your rhythm track so your VU meter maximum point is 0 dB. Not less than that. Now when I tried to increase this one, the loudest it could get was -2, which is fine. I've added 6 decibels of gain to this. That's as high as I'm going to get it. So you want to try to get, let's say your rhythm track as close to 0 as you can. That's a good level. Next thing I want to do is to unmute the lead, and I'm going to increase the fader level until the lead sounds like it's the same level as the rhythm. The lead is going to be in what's called the mid-range frequencies, and those are the ones we're most sensitive to. So if the lead sounds right on small computer speakers, it will probably also sound fine on larger speakers because you're just adding the bass underneath it. We want that lead to match the level of the rhythm in those mid frequencies. So I can start with it quiet and bring it up slowly. I'm listening a lot to the snare because that's that mid frequency, and does that lead part match the snare level? I'm not watching the numbers at this point, by the way, I'm listening. Next, I'm going to unmute the bass, and I'm going to turn up the bass until it is just behind the kick in terms of level. I want to hear the bass, but I don't want it to be louder than the kick. It needs to be quieter than the kick. In the old days, they thought you needed more bass, so they would turn the bass up way too high. And if you listen to like the Beatles in the late 60s, the bass is overwhelming the kick. And we've learned since then that the kick is the most important because our brain will associate that sustain of the bass sound with the kick. And so what the bass will sound like is a kick drum with pitch ultimately. So I'm going to bring it up so it's a little bit quieter than the kick. I could probably go that level. I want a little bit more, but that's how quiet you could have the bass. It's too loud there, right? It's overriding the kick. Again, the focus needs to be on the lead and the rhythm parts. The bass fills in. I know it sounds strange because we're so used to hearing those big subwoofers going, but that's okay. The subwoofer will bring out that bass later. If you start putting too much on the front end, it's going to overload the system. And you can see that my bass level is lower than my rhythm part. Now, the level of the bass in a song has changed tremendously over the last 20 years. In rock and roll, it was very bright. In hip hop, the mixes are much, much more bass-centric. But the problem that I've heard students do over and over and over is always adding too much bass. So err on the side of less bass than you think you want. A loud kick sound with a little bit of bass behind it will sound like a lot of bass. It won't sound like a kick with a little bit of bass. After we've done that, I want you to bring in the accompaniment part, unmute it, and then bring that level up. Now, the accompaniment part, in a lot of ways, it determines what genre you're listening to. Certain genres, like country and rock, have very loud accompaniment parts, whereas others like hip hop have very quiet accompaniment parts. So I'm going to bring in that accompaniment part, and I'm going to bring it in basically just until I hear it, and I'm going to make sure it's never interfering with any other part. It doesn't step on the bass, the lead, or the rhythm part. So here we go. I could have it that quiet if I wanted. too loud there. Now my accompaniment is trying to be my lead. It's not the lead instrument. It can't be jumping out front because it just keeps sitting there saying the same thing over and over and over. So make sure your accompaniment is the quietest of the 4 main tracks. That's how you do the 4 main tracks. Then everything else, bring in behind those tracks no louder than the accompaniment. The biggest problem I hear with the effects and supplemental tracks is students make them too loud. I rarely hear them be too quiet. Use your accompaniment track as the reference point for that. If you start bringing in a shaker or a sweep at the same level as your lead or your rhythm part, it's going to overwhelm your track. So err on the side of the supplemental and effects tracks being quieter. You can see how much quieter they are on the VU meters, right? There's those haze are way too loud now, and that happens often in student tracks. I'm listening to the accompaniment part, right? I want the haze to be the same level as the accompaniment. Then when you want to master your track, you need to come over to the main output and you need to put a limiter on your main output. If you've done a good job of setting your initial levels, especially setting your rhythm as close to 0 as you can get it, you should be overloading your limiter slightly. And I can see I'm going over the limit amount a little bit there, about 1 decibel. You may be seeing closer to 3 or 4. If you're seeing over 4 decibels of reduction right here, it means your levels are too loud going in and you need to come back and start over. Bring all the parts down, and in most applications you can slide across all the tracks and say, whoop, let me turn down everything a little bit. So if you're seeing more than 4 decibels of reduction at that limiter right at the beginning, it means it's too loud. Now, different DAWs have different types of limiters on them, so you'll see that yours might look a little bit different than Logic's. But what I'm doing is I'm looking for the amount of gain reduction, how much that limiter is capping off the level. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to set that so that reduction is between 3 and 4 decibels of reduction. It's cutting off the loudest sounds, 3 or 4 decibels, but not more. If it's more than 4 decibels, your ear is going to hear it and it's going to sound like distortion. I'm going to hit play. And then I'm going to turn the gain up until I see what I just saw right there. No more than 4 decibels of reduction, so I'll turn that down a tiny bit. You can see the loudest part of my track is right around measure 71. I click on this to reset it. That's right where I want to be. 3.5 decibels of reduction, that's where you want to be on yours. And then you set the output level of your limiter to negative 0.1 decibels. So we have a little bit of headroom over the top right here so that we're not overloading any systems. That's it. By reducing the peak levels of your track by about 3 decibels and then increasing the output until it's just under 0 dB, you're going to have a really nice level on your track. It'll be loud without having a lot of distortion. This is called mastering. When we're working over here on the stereo out, that's mastering. That's an art form that will also take you most of the rest of your life, and we'll be covering more techniques further in this class. For this first song, I want you to have good basic levels between your parts, and I want you to have a nice loud signal that doesn't have distortion on your M4A or your MP3.